Hey there everyone, Charles J. Baserap here with a return to regular episodes of Hashtag The Thing after that epic 5-part season premiere miniseries event, and I'd like to thank and welcome back those who've already checked it out. If this is your first time here at the Crossroads, thanks for joining us. Please do feel free to have a look around at the other videos, and I hope you stick around and subscribe. Now, before I get any further into this one, I do want to give a quick update on the aftermath of the Racism in America miniseries. Now, since it dropped, I've been in contact with various law enforcement agencies in my area of Maryland, as well as the offices of certain members of Congress. Now, my name so far has been taken down as a potential speaker to participate in a community outreach roundtable on police reform once our county's COVID restrictions ease up. My county has stayed at phase 2 just to keep things at bay because we're one of the higher end counties in Montgomery County. So they don't want us to have to open, close. We can just, in theory, open and go forward when it's safe enough. Members of Congressman Raskin and Senator Cardin's teams requested I send some ideas forward via email after I spoke to some people from their staff over the phone. Both offices have received those emails, and it was giving a brief description of ideas for police reform that I spoke about in episode 1.5. While Raskin's office is still reviewing things, I actually do have a telephonic meeting with Senator Cardin's office with his legislative correspondent and chief counsel this coming Thursday, October 22nd. So that's a pretty big deal, and I'll be talking about that in a subsequent video once that meeting happens. So stay tuned for that one, folks, probably this weekend. So I've started getting those wheels in motion towards reform. In my area at least, and now it's all about keeping that momentum going. So I really do appreciate the support that you've shown me thus far. I know not a lot of people are watching these things, and I knew that going into it, that it was going to be hard to get an audience for something like this. But maybe soon they'll see what they've been missing out on. Maybe this is the beginning of something bigger. We'll see what happens. Now, of course, depending on who you ask, momentum might not matter in a few weeks' time anyway, due to a little thing called Election Day. If 2020 was an election, sweet Christmas would be this one. If you watched any of the debates, in part or in whole, or followed anything going on over the past several years, our political leaders basically are maybe a day away from just flinging poop at one another and calling it a day. We're pretty much at that point where a lot of people would honestly vote for COVID before either of the tickets that have been thrust upon us. It's gone beyond train wreck. Right now, it's more like there's a plane full of nuns in a tailspin that's heading towards a bus full of orphans that are stalled down on a railway crossing. There's a thermonuclear train carrying 3-legged puppies and literal dumpsters on fire just barrels towards that convergence point. Somehow, this is the best our great nation could offer to its 320 million plus citizens. And isn't that a little scary? I mean, from the debates alone, it's obvious no one really wins here. They just maybe kind of lose a little bit less. Lots of yelling and arguing. Trump just, talking over people and telling things that aren't true. Biden tripping over words and not saying anything of substance. Pence towing the party line and trotting out the same talking points that have been disproven repeatedly going into the event. And this aegis of protection that the media has given Harris because, God forbid a man debates her in a debate. We'll have 900 articles telling us how racist and sexist, slay queen slay. So it's all pointless. Personally, I'd like to see a change in the debate format because really it's useless right now. I mean, I know they want to mute them, and that's pretty funny. But maybe a shock collar, I don't know. But the thing with debates is no one is changing their minds. They're turning on to the debates not really to hear anything. They're going to cheer it on like it's a sporting event. They'll deflect any criticism, refuse to acknowledge missteps by their own candidates. So it really just becomes like any sort of sporting event at this point. So that said, I'd like to see some changes to the format. Let's have third-party fact checkers be available on hand in real time. No more of this we'll check after the fact selectively. And we don't want the ones like on Facebook's fact checkers, where they'll say a statement, that was partly cloudy is mostly false because they determined it was partly sunny. When everyone's already made up their minds that their candidate was perfect, nothing go. These people are in general, they're looking to see what the other person gets wrong. They don't want to acknowledge what their own, side gets wrong because, heaven help them, they would actually have to change their minds or adjust their myopia. So let's have the fact checkers be there on hand so that the candidates are forced to be like, hey, I can't go from talking points anymore. Someone's just called me out. Now I have to defend or I have to acknowledge. because that would show some maturity, that would show some quick thinking, that would show being able to think on your feet and how to rely on more than just your prepared notes. Now, in the event the fact checker lets something slip, and debate contestant's pretty sure that what that person just said was wrong, they get 3 bullshit flags they can toss per event, like a challenge flag in the NFL. Flag is thrown, it's successfully held up, it's not lost, it's retained by the thrower, and that person is then allowed to just slap the other person once in a mostly peaceful manner. If a flag is thrown and the evidence says it was actually a true statement, the thrower loses the flag, and the accused gets to slap the accuser in the same mostly peaceful manner as described above. Now, at the end of the debate, we tally up the points as determined by the fact checkers that were acting of their own volition or through the flag challenges, and whoever has the least marks against them, they're the winner of the debate. They get to make the closing remarks, and the loser has to sit in the corner and apologize to us for wasting our time. Now, in the event of a tie, both contestants go to constitutional law trivia lightning round to determine the winner. Some may be at a disadvantage, given that they don't understand still how the president is allowed to select a Supreme Court justice when a vacancy arises and doesn't have to wait until it's nice. But, hey, it's something. Should they draw again, the moderator hands out melee weapons that were confiscated from the mostly peaceful demonstrations undoubtedly outside the venue, and they fight it out. Personally, I'm kind of pulling for that double tiebreaker scenario at this point. Of course, this being the age of hyper-partisan politics and media, not to mention the shrill echo chambers of social media platforms, it's already been hyped as the most important election in world history, with both sides pulling out every hyperbole they've been using and adding more to the arsenal of overstatements. But politics has always been violent in its rhetoric when you think about it. We call this a campaign, a military term for a series of battles. The funds are a war chest. Everything is framed as a battle for this, the struggle for that, the fight against whatever. Because when you put everything in such binary terms, especially military us versus them types, it's a lot easier to stop seeing the other side as anything but the enemy. So you can just take solace in knowing you're the good guy. And honestly, though, it is important. But at the same time, it feels a little bit sometimes like it's more so for the fringes and extremes who stand to gain, or the fringes and extremes who will react badly if things don't go their way, the latter of which unnerves me a little bit more even than the former. This was always going to be a contentious election. It was. Even before COVID and George Floyd and everything else 2020's thrown at us, the media bias has been in overdrive the past year, both sides of it, and people are so desperate to believe whatever they see for their candidate or against the other that they'll like, share, and spread, while crying about Russian or Chinese influence. First of all, yeah, I'm sure those countries are trying to do to our elections what we've done to elections for decades, influence them towards their own goals. We don't really get to Nancy Kerrigan, why me, when our own government has done some hella shady things, from arming insurrections to outright assisting in removal of leaders, dictators notwithstanding. So it seems to me people should be a little less upset that there are disinformation campaigns, and more upset that they're often too bloody daft or lazy to fact-check things before sharpening those hashtag pitchforks for the internet hive mob. They tell lies, shame on them. But if you keep spreading them without verifying them, well then shame on you. The recent Hunter Biden story is irresistible to the right, I understand that, and it's amazing how underplayed it's been by the left end of the media, who would have dry-humped it into submission if it were info about Trump. But at the same time, it's pretty suspect. The circumstances have changed a couple of times. The story's been a little bit, a little wibbly-wobbly. While plausible, I'm personally going to need to see more before I make a judgment on that. Now, I'm not saying it shouldn't be investigated, because it definitely should be, to make sure to verify this information. But I am saying that I don't want to rush to judgment and jump on it, because I know a lot of people want it to be true. We've seen how that's turned out before so many times, like the impeachment to nowhere and other stories about Trump that, wound up being a waste of time. So let's focus on what we do know, what the facts really are right now. And that story, honestly, is a minor blip compared to the specter of COVID that's been cast over everything during this. Because here's where things get crazy. Voting is super important. It is. As flawed as our system is, and I'll offer some ideas for tweaking things as we go along and towards the end, but it's all we've got right now. And it's important to voice ourselves in this manner, and it really is something that makes us stand out from a lot of other countries. There are a lot of countries that don't have even this ability to do that. So for all of our flaws, this is something that's pretty good. But making things complicated is this fear of the resurgence of COVID as we head into the fall, and whether people will brave the polls in person to cast a vote. And so, begun the mail wars have. Now, here's a situation that both sides completely manufactured, like they're trying to instigate a fight to justify their actions afterwards, like it's putting a down payment on the crap they're going to pull depending on the outcome. The left sounded the alarm early, telling everyone the only way to be safe was to vote by mail and trying to scare everyone away from voting in person. Now, Democrats are statistically more likely to vote by mail than Republicans, and that's held true so far right now, so they want to make sure as many Biden votes get in there as possible. It makes sense. But is it necessary or viable? Because here's the thing. While mail-in and absentee votes have long been a thing, we're in a country where it took weeks to count the votes for just the Iowa caucuses for the Democrats, a hot mess that wound up with the Iowa DNC chair resigning in deserved embarrassment. We're in a country where we've found literally dozens of trash bags of undelivered mail in recent months. We're in a country where several small elections have been tainted by mail-in votes and write-in votes and things like that. We're in a country where the U.S. Postal Service has been doing a good job, but is still struggling at times. And heck, I've had 6 out of like 10 packages in the last 2 or 3 years lost just going to my house, and I'm constantly getting the wrong mail. We've had people getting multiple voting, ballots. We've had people getting the wrong ones. We've had dead people getting them. So, it's to put the most important election in the history of ever almost solely in their hands is unfair, and it's hard because it's not like they're not doing anything else. I've seen these posts that say, well, they handle X amount of Christmas cards during the season, so they can do it. But that's missing the point that that's part of their normal output. They plan for that. They know it's coming because Christmas happens every year. Those cards are coming every year. This is potentially millions of extra pieces of mail for a very important election, not the few thousands that they would get in a normal election year. And that's on top of their regular everyday output. Now on Trump's end, not to be outdone in the inane Olympics, he started to do everything he could to make it harder for the USPS to do their job, appointing personnel that made cuts and reduced sorting machines, among other things, essentially trying to manifest a self-fulfilling prophecy where he hamstrings the USPS and then says, well, see, I told you they couldn't do it, all while calling the mail-in votes illegitimate, setting up a nightmare potential on Election Day. Now, the Democrats warned several weeks ago that we could see a scenario in which Trump wins on election night because of in-person voting, but then up to a week later, the mail-in votes might flip it the other way. And topping that, some areas wanted to allow postmarks past Election Day, up to 2 days past, which means in close districts, people can gamble and hold back, then try to see if it's close enough to influence and try and maybe get a bunch of zero-hour votes to swing things once they see where things stand. This is different from counting votes up to a few days after the election that were properly postmarked, but delayed because of weather, overload, or whatever. But there really does need to be some sort of postmark deadline to avoid people waiting until the day before, knowing full well the problems it will cause in such a big election. Seriously, no, that shouldn't be a thing. If you were that concerned about mail-in versus in-person voting, you needed to be doing at this point everything possible to make sure that those votes, all of them, are in, and that they're counted transparently and within a day, not a week, maybe 2 days, but not a week. Because honestly, as much as I don't support Trump in general, I back him throwing a BS flag if that scenario happens. I wouldn't trust it without independent third-party verification. Does anyone remember how the DNC had their own votes being shady and that whole thing going back when Sanders got screwed because they'd already decided that Hillary was their best shot? Yeah, we all do. And you know what? That was a big thing that cost them key votes in the middle of the road and youth voters that felt jilted and then decided to just walk away because they felt betrayed. They felt that the democratic process wasn't reflecting who they wanted, but more who the DNC wanted to go up against Trump. Now, in a recent interview in the New York Times and in Forbes, Democrat and Republican talking heads alike were saying that vote counting and the like, especially in situations like this, based on their experiences with the hanging chads and issues in the 2000 election, they make it impossible for complete impartiality to be maintained completely. So there needs to be something in place to ensure that it's all above the board. Now, I know the word Orwellian gets overused quite a bit these days, but it does feel a bit like Animal Farm, where the pigs declare no animal should use human beds, and the sheep repeat it over and over, and then they change it to mean no beds with sheets, and the sheep repeat that as if it's always been that way, or to jump to another of his works, that they've always been at war with Eurasia. I bring that up because when the Democrats outlined this nightmare scenario, Trump refused to give an answer as to whether or not he'd step aside in the peaceful transfer of power. He actually sidestepped it a bit to say that he would step aside if it was a legitimate result. The caveat, of course, being that what's legitimate in reality may not be deemed so by a man whose phrasing in this instance scarcely echoes those of dictators in history who have refused to abdicate. Now, seeing this, the Democrats quickly pivoted, reversed course a bit, and started pushing people to get out there in person if they can to avoid this, which is all they had to do in the first place. Instead, they created this nightmare scenario by fixing on a "you have to vote by mail" mantra for months, even as they had people rioting and protesting various things, including, get this, not voting in person, and pushing Trump into this reaction. I mean, think about that for a second. If a group of people who are saying it's not safe to vote in person, so then they go in person in a protest. Really? But, compounding it, and why I really thought of Orwell during this and brought it up is I watched people on my Facebook feed that for months were posting about how mail-in was the only way to go and don't let Trump scare you away, suddenly start posting things like, here's how to vote safely in person, and listing things like wearing gloves, bringing your own pen, wearing a mask, etc., which is literally exactly what rational people were saying from the jump. Suddenly common sense prevailed? Or are you just following along because that's what the party says now? It was frightening to see how much of a 180 people I knew, they made, like a switch was flipped. It was friends and family alike. As a party, we saw Democrats go from saying mail-in voting was totally safe and there was no evidence of fraud, and then fraud came out, and even one of their own, Tulsi Gabbard, called out another instance of potential scandal involving, Omar in Minnesota, and then saying there was no evidence of widespread fraud, just adding in that word like sheets on human beds, like it had always been there. And that's what I'd see go out there on the news. And the truth is, the Democrats are correct. There are instances of fraud and tampering, there's no doubt, but it hasn't been widespread to date. Of course, we haven't seen something this widespread on a mail-in national level where they're expecting such an unprecedented amount. So what may be a small amount on a regular year may wind up being magnified exponentially. We'll have to see. It doesn't mean that it can't be. And both sides trying to do things like, beating the drum of voting in person will kill us because of COVID, or things like, setting up drop boxes for mail-ins that are kind of questionable quality and don't really, don't know if they're actually collecting the votes or actually going to toss them out. I kind of feel like, you're going into the back of some stranger's van type things that some, Republican areas have been doing. But the Democrats created this vote by mail, you'll kill grandma with COVID mentality. Then realized, geez, that was a misstep. But they're acting like they were never all in on it in the first place. Here's the thing, man. If you're that scared, okay, I get it. Fill in your absentee stuff, vote by mail, etc. I can respect that. I am someone in the high risk group because I do have, a health issue, an underlying health issue. I keep myself safe. I wear my mask. I do my due diligence. I do what I'm supposed to do. I'm all right with that. So I get that. I respect that. But it doesn't have to be an either or. Trying to scare people away from voting in person or shaming them for killing grandma is the same as trying to scare people from voting by mail by bringing up these specters of widespread fraud and illegitimacy that's going to undermine democracy. If you can stand in line at Costco, if you can go shopping, if you can protest and riot, if you can travel by the thousands into D.C. to stand in line to pay respects to a Supreme Court justice you didn't even know personally, while tens of thousands haven't been able to bury loved ones in person for the last several months, well, guess what? It is safe enough for you to go vote in person, especially if the world literally hangs in the balance, as you're saying. Just take the same precautions. It's not complicated. Democrats planted the seed and spun people up, and then we needed another cleanup in aisle Trump when the president refused to commit to a peaceful stepping down that seems dependent on what he deems legitimate. And already calling the process illegitimate just in its existence is alarming and not helping at all. And the Republicans are not helping at all by just being like, yeah, it's pretty cool. Okay, we'll go with it. No, some have been speaking out, but not enough. We need more people to be like, yes, when this outcome, if this is what it is, this is what it is. Bringing an even bigger complication on top of all of this is camps of both extremes planning violent reactions and using incendiary language on social media and publicly that promise Election Day may be a veritable war zone. Here are some key scenarios. Here's the three scenarios I can see happening here. Biden wins in a landslide, even before the mail-in votes are counted. This is actually the best case scenario for post-election violence. Right-wing groups, probably act out, but honestly, given the way it's been in recent years, we'll probably, if we see things, it'll probably be something drawn out, nothing all at once, spontaneous things like that. We'll see some, things happen. They need to be watched. Groups that are on watch lists like that need to be checked out, make sure that they're held back. But I don't see it being the same as in scenario 2, where Trump wins in a landslide. And because we saw what happened last time he won. The left will do what they've done for the last 4 years, elements of it, not all of it, obviously, but it'll be throw a tantrum, and we'll see riots and mostly peaceful fires while people kick hornets' nests, then cry they got stung. Then right-wing groups will react, and there will be reciprocal violence while Trump again fails to calm things, probably just tweeting na-na-na-na-na instead and doing nothing. Now, the other scenario is Trump wins on election night. Days later, Biden's declared. That's the nightmare scenario. That scenario gives us scenario 2, followed by 1, all while a long, brutal legal battle to count the votes by an independent verifier go through, who knows for how long. This can potentially be more explosive than anything we've seen in recent history, and it's important for the media, for the politicians, for the moderates, for the celebrities, for the athletes, to rein this nonsense in and start distancing themselves from it now, not later. In episode 1.4, I talked about the power that celebrities have on the media. I talked about how in 1.5, how the media has power, and when they say things like that, and a celebrity that has 80 million followers says, go burn that all down, it's going to make people want to burn things down. You don't get to sit there and go, well, I meant it metaphorically. No, you didn't. And if you did, you didn't make that clear, because now people are following you. All right, so don't do that. So we can't have celebrities and people encouraging people to burn it all if Biden loses. We can't have right-wing groups being told to stand by as if they're going to be called on if Trump loses. We can't have the media pussyfooting around like it's been for months and refusing to condemn violence. Same thing with politicians. This needs to be handled before it happens, or it's not going to get handled, period. If there's a delay on mail counts, fix it fast, do it transparently, show us the receipts. If Biden wins and everything is clean, President Trump, you need to come to terms with it. Republicans, you need to come to terms with it. No crying, no declarations of it being illegitimate. In January, you better be handing over those keys to President Biden, and that's that. No attacks, no fights, no anything violent, period. If Trump wins and everything is clean, Democrats, you need to get your shit together. Because I can't take another 4 years of tantrums and pointing fingers everywhere else but at yourself and the stunning lack of self-awareness you've by and large shown. I'm an independent. I keep hearing people tell me I need to vote. I will. I always do. But most people saying that mean I need to vote the way they want me to. They try to guilt or shame people, pigeonhole them by saying they're not real blacks or gays or Christians or women or white men or whatever if they don't vote a certain way or if they do vote a certain way. I'm tired of people trying to shame people or say people who are choosing not to vote are selfish or privileged or they'll cause us all to die or demanding people announce who they're voting for so they know who they could brand with a scarlet or cerulean letter to be shunned or telling me, of all people, to consider the bigger picture. I mean, in the words of Senator Biden, come on, man. That's literally my entire shtick. Being an independent, it's not easy. It doesn't mean that we feel both sides are the same, that both sides are equally good and equally bad. It doesn't mean we have no opinions and are completely neutral. No, I have opinions. Honestly, I voted for George W. Bush and I voted for Obama because I felt they were the best at the time and their overall platform meshed best, though not perfectly, with my own values at those times. And I felt it was what the country needed at those times. Being an independent means not towing the line to this point of morbidity that we're seeing. I live in Maryland. I can't imagine that this state goes to Trump. My vote is basically like pissing in the ocean. It might warm a small little area, but it's really not going to do anything. This state hasn't voted red since George H.W. Bush in '88 carried 51%. We didn't even like Clinton and she got 60% in 2016. So me voting Trump, Biden, or a block of wood isn't really going to matter much. How can it? Well, maybe open up who can run for president. Stop essentially rigging it so that really the only realistic chances are the rich from the two main parties. I get why a third party can be scary in a purely popular vote. In a fictional country of 90 people where everyone can vote, the minimum majority a candidate would need is 46 in a two-party race. It would be a 46 to 44 victory. A lot of people would be unhappy, but the majority, however slim, would be. Now, they'd be happy. If we throw a third party into that mix, the minimum majority becomes 31 because you can conceivably have a 31-30-29 split amongst the three candidates. And while first place definitely got the most votes, the majority of voters aren't going to be happy. But we don't simply use popular vote. We have the Electoral College here. It's not perfect, but when you really think about it, it's necessary. We can change the way the Electoral College runs, though. I know that a lot of people now, they want it gone, conveniently, since they lost in 2016. Imagine that. And I've seen the whole, well, land doesn't vote, people do. But it's why the EC was put into place, to prevent concentrated areas from forever controlling the vote and never giving people in other areas a voice. I bet dollars to donuts the people crying about it now wouldn't be if it flipped the votes the other way, if I had the chance to do that, and vice versa. It prevents tyranny. It stops 3 or 4 states from controlling every election in perpetuity. And here's an aside, it's also why there needs to be term limits for Congress and Supreme Court justices. Because we see how these people have been in Congress for how many years, and things are still the problem, but a president can be in there for two terms, and they're the only problem that exists. And if your concern over new justices is that they lean a certain way, and you wanted to stack it for the next 40 years with those that leaned another way, well, that shows a huge flaw in that you don't believe or even necessarily want the court to be impartial as it should be. You want to have a partisan stranglehold on the legal system. But that's a conversation for another day. Going back to the EC, some states allocate votes more or less proportionately. Well, let's make that a thing universally. Let's give it out there. You win 50% of the votes, you win 52% of the votes. Hey, that's how many percentage of the EC votes you're going to get. So instead of someone like me feeling pointless and disenfranchised because I already get zero say in the candidates because I can't participate in primaries as it is since I'm an independent, I'll actually feel like my vote counts because right now, no matter who I vote for, pretty much almost 100% certainty that all Maryland EC votes are going to Biden. But if there was a chance that 6 might go to one, 4 to another, there may be 7-3 split, I don't know. But now we've got ourselves a ball game. The stakes just got higher. It's a heated debate that usually has more to do with partisan leanings and not historical knowledge and understanding. At one point, Virginia's state government was actually considering an amendment that would have allowed the state to allocate the votes to whoever they chose, irrespective of the actual results, to protect against Trump potentially winning its 13 EC votes, given that Hillary won with only 49% and Trump got pretty close with 44%. Until they were reminded by people of silly little things like the law and voter disenfranchisement. Though the latter term, gets used rather fast and loose these days by people who deem either everything or nothing is voter disenfranchisement. Spoiler, it's not requiring ID or citizenship. It is intentional partisan gerrymandering. So let's, get things right before we say things about those. But while we're at it, let's let people decide more on the vice president. No more foisting them on the candidates or on us. Biden didn't really, she wasn't his first pick, Senator Harris. She wasn't. And I don't honestly see Biden lasting a full term if elected, and I hope he does if he's elected because I don't want anything bad to happen to any president or anybody. But, there's a very real potential that, he will not finish out his term. And I kind of feel that Harris, who just a few months ago was using the Believe All Women card and calling Biden a racist and was a complete non-factor in the primaries, never placing anywhere worth noting. And there were plenty of other, people that placed ahead of her that could have been selected that were also women, that were also people of color, if that's what they were really wanting to go for. I feel like she was kind of appointed as a kind of like a little Trojan horse successor. Personally, I liked Yang and Gabbard as picks. I would have preferred them more so. But, whatever. I don't get a say. And that's kind of the point I'm making here. None of us do. To be honest, I was actually pulling for, Senator McCain early in the 2008 campaign. I had gotten to meet him several times while I was at the White House under George W. Bush. And then it wasn't until Palin was nominated as the VP that I was just like, what? And I know a lot of people who were like that, and that threw me off. I didn't think that she had what it took in the event that McCain went down. I already knew Biden at that time was, a lot, more together than right now. And I wasn't completely put off by Senator Obama. So my vote went to eventual President Obama, and it did again in 2012, to be honest. I'm being perfectly transparent here. But, while we're at it, let's run these campaigns like fantasy baseball pay leagues. Players get a salary cap. They've got to build their team. Do they blow a bunch of money, signing a stud like Judge or Trout, or do they spend it more shrewdly on some upper mid-level talent, for a more balanced team? So every candidate gets a salary cap of money they're allowed to raise, and that's it. Once they hit that number, that's all they get. They can't replenish it. Period. It's done. They then need to determine how to campaign. Do they use ads? If so, print, radio, television, what? Do they travel? How? Buses, planes, trains, cars, walk? What do you do? First class, coach? How many cities? How many days? Do you stay at hotels? When the candidates can show that they can manage that effectively, when they show that they can do what millions of Americans are forced to do every single day to decide, which bills will take priority, are they going to pay the water or the electricity first? Are they going to be able to eat out this week and get groceries, or are they going to have to tighten their belts for another week? When these candidates can demonstrate that they can balance their own budgets, well, then maybe I'll vote for them to balance all our budgets. But as it is, we have extremely wealthy individuals, millionaires, even billionaires this past time out there, and they're asking everyday people like me and you for monetary donations instead of just dipping into their own pockets, and they never have to pay a dime back, whether they win or lose. Just go to the craps table or bet on the Knicks if you want to throw money away with no reward. In January, he's Democrat, but really, for the most part, leanings, more towards socialist, the champion of the little guy against the 1%, Bernie Sanders. His campaign announced that they raised more than any other candidate in a single quarter, the fourth quarter of 2019, a whopping $34.5 million that they raised just in the fourth quarter of last year. And he lost. He's a millionaire with socialist leanings, with multiple houses, and again, millionaire, and people gave him over $30 million of their own money, and he lost. Then went back to live his life of riches while everyone who donated got exactly nothing out of the deal. Really? That's the system that we're going to keep encouraging? Why? That's something that needs to be addressed. People who became millionaires while working on a government salary. Not the people telling us that, you shouldn't be, you shouldn't have money. It's absurd. Look, this election's important, but how we react is perhaps even more so. Because we cannot survive another 4 years of bickering and name-calling and virtue signaling, vote-shaming, strawman, and ad hominem bullshit. We just can't. It's not productive. It's alienating. It's divisive. And you're not doing anything if you're just going to sit there and scream into your echo chamber. If our politicians refuse to be better, we need to be. We need to lead the way productively. Not just by screaming online and tweeting and like farming on Facebook, not rioting and causing untold millions in property damage, not attacking people for having flags or banners or wearing hats or shirts or having opinions. Not by, refusing to acknowledge that, hey, maybe we're partly responsible for this. How about that? So I'm asking you, please, think before you share things. Make sure you fact-checked. Don't dye yourself in the wool so deeply you can't get out like it's some sort of weird cult. Don't be afraid to call out people on your side and say, hey, pump the brakes. We're going a little too fast around this curve, buddy. Who am I voting for? Well, same as always. Whoever I feel is best right now. I just hope that regardless of the outcome, and hopefully sooner than later, the moderate voices gain enough power to get away from these fringes. Because people that want to hold 12-step programs for being white on college campuses, people who want to kidnap politicians for COVID restrictions, people who wish death upon the president as some sort of divine karma, when he gets sick, people who still refuse to acknowledge social and racial and gender disparities and injustices, these are the people hijacking the parties. And the other people keep turning a blind eye because they think they're safe, even toss the occasional like their way in appeasement. But eventually they're going to come to realize that they're in the sights next. And just like they didn't stand up for when they came for those other groups, no one's going to be left to stand up for them to come, when they're they get on their side. Because, hey, This national nightmare will wind up being our ultimate undoing if we keep allowing these fringes to prosper and giving them the lion's share of the attention. Whoever you vote for, I wish you well. Not because I'm Republican or Democrat or Independent, because I'm a person, and so are you, and we're sharing this country regardless. We tend to forget that when we try to simplify and other everyone, not in lockstep with our view of what's best. Remember that. Stay safe, be well, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time out on the next episode of #TheThing.